I am so conflicted about Untethered Skies. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I will be reviewing Untethered Sky by the one and only Fonda, author of the Greenbone Saga. So, in case you don't know, Untethered Sky is a standalone novella by Fonda, and this is actually the first thing I have read by her. I have not yet read the Greenbone Saga. After reading this, it is something that I would like to bump up my TBR. But yeah, this is the first thing, and if you don't know, super quick, synopsis of this book is using giant birds to attack monsters. Now, this is a story I am very, very conflicted about, and I will get into that after I go over the good and the bad of this book. So starting off with the good, and this is part of what I'm conflicted about, I'm gonna say the length. I think the way this is written, it works really well as a novella. There are things that could definitely be worked out and pulled on and expanded upon to really flesh out this story and make it a full-length novel. I could definitely see that being the case. But, and I don't know if maybe it just hit me at the right time. I'm reading a lot of really long series, The Way of Kings, that kind of like long fantasy stories. So maybe it just kind of was the perfect palate cleanser I needed. And that's why I liked that it was so short. So, that is maybe part of it, but I really just kind of did. And that's actually going to be my second good for this, is the pacing. The length and the pacing together just go so well. It is not the kind of story we're going to sit down and feel emotions. I mean, there is a little bit of that. Don't get me wrong. There is some of that, but this is very much, start the story. Okay, we get our, what kicks us off. We get some training. We get the bird. We get, a couple adventures. We get the climax, and there's not really much going on. I mean, this is a 150-page novella that I read in like a couple hours. It is super fast, super quick pacing, but I liked it. It worked super well for the story that was being told. And, it's such a weird thing to say because part of me, and this is, wanted it to be longer, but I think the length and the pacing actually worked super well. I mentioned that we don't spend too much time sitting with emotion and stuff, but when we do, and there are a few emotional kind of moments in this, particularly at the very end, and just kind of the connection that our main character has with her bird, or rock, I think is how you're supposed to say it. Those emotions are very well done, and seeing that is actually kind of part of the reason why I wanted to move Greenbone Saga up. I thought if Fonda could do that with the emotions in such a short story, I'd love to see what she can do when she has, a full page count to do it. But, it's not emotions you sit with. They're emotions you feel and then kind of get over. Like I said, for the length and the pacing of this story, it worked really well. But, if you expect more out of it, it's not going to work for you. I will mention that I did really like the creatures, the rock, the big birds that you see on the cover. I returned my copy to the library already, or I'd hold it up for you. I did like it. I thought the manicore, the evil thing, or the creature that is primarily being hunted by the rock, the description of it was super cool. And just, these giant birds, like the falconry that's kind of, involved in this story, I don't know, I just thought it was really cool. And the creature interaction that happens in this, prey-predator kind of relationship was just pretty cool. I'll also just mention how kind of blunt Fonda is with that these are still wild animals. I really got that feeling of like, we see an elephant in the circus, but we all know that that's still like a wild animal. It could snap at any time, and that kind of gets woven into this story, and I really liked that. It was a nice touch because I think too many times with these kind of stories where there's like an animal companion, unless it's like a sentient kind of creature, they're so benevolent and there's no working of that relationship. It just is like, oh, this thing follows me around, it's my best friend. And to see like the way the relationship is formed with this, wild creature was just really cool. Now, moving on to the bad, and a lot of these negatives are things that would be, fleshed out in a full-length novel. So I'll go ahead and start with, there's no real character development. I really felt like every character we meet is pretty much more or less the same from the start to the end. There's no like huge differences in how they feel. I mean, there's some, obviously, there is some character development, especially at the very, very end. But saying that, even at the very, very end, I feel like that little bit of character development is pushed back. So, I think if this was a full-length novel, I can definitely see the strands of where storylines would get moved to and how characters would interact differently and some kind of plot threads that would happen. But, and I guess it works for the story that there's not that much change, but I don't know, there are definitely some things that I think could have been fleshed out even just a little bit more. I don't think 25 more pages changes, this novel too much, but I think it had some extra character depth that would be really nice. I will also mention that there's no real bigger picture. This is a very pinpointed kind of story, which is fine. I did like that, but part of me also wished I would have got to see a little bit more of how this world worked. We don't get too much of that. We get a little bit of like, expansion to the east, there's a king, but that's really the most. And, I think, like I said, 25 more pages to fill out the story doesn't change, that this is a novella or anything, but I think just that little bit would flesh it out just enough that kind of scratches that itch in this world. This seems like a really fascinating world to be a part of, and I would like to see some more of that. The last thing I will mention is that there's no real antagonist. We have these creatures we are hunting, and they try to make it seem evil. We get a little hints of these like religious bits of how people feel about this monster. I mean, it's really just a wild animal. And so to make that the antagonist, I mean, yes, it works in the way this story is framed, but overall, it's kind of a weak antagonist. It's just like hunting, and so I just didn't feel like it really justified it being the antagonist, and it does bad things. Like, I can understand why it works, but it doesn't. And I'm like fence sitting there, but it's not like a real antagonist. It's just doing what it does. It's an animal. It doesn't, we didn't get any like it's a sentient being or anything. It's just a wild animal doing what it does. And while what it does is bad, it's like, can you blame a woodpecker for like annoying you while it, pecks a tree? Like, that's kind of how I felt about the creature. What a woodpecker pecking a tree. So that is my good and the bad. And now let me talk about why I'm so conflicted about this story. I feel like if you flesh this out to a full-length novel, it could maybe get a little too bloated and be a little dull, but I also think it had enough to where if Fonda Lee had fleshed this out, it would have been a great, great story. A full-length fantasy, we could get so much out of it. And I guess it's not too late. She could always come back to this world. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I would actually encourage another book in this series, or if it could become a series. And I'm so conflicted because I think it works so well as a novella. This just quick, fast-paced story is fine. And I'm not the kind of person who has a problem with novellas. I've read a lot of novellas, and this is definitely one of the better ones. But I don't know, I'm just so conflicted because I can see how this would be such a great fantasy story. And it's still a good fantasy story, but why stop at good when we can get to great? So overall, I did end up giving this a 3-star rating. I think it's good. And as far as novellas go, it's in like the upper tier of good. And, I'm glad I read it. It definitely feels like it should be a movie though. And I had the same kind of feeling when I read Hellmouth by Giles Christensen earlier this year. It's another novella, and I just feel like both of these books would make really good movies, maybe even like a small miniseries, like, 3 or 4 episodes. If you fleshed it out, I think it could be, pretty good. Once again, I would be pretty happy if she came back to this world. Even with it just another novella, I would be fine with that. Maybe we can focus on a different part of the kingdom that this is all taking place. But that is all I have for Untethered Sky. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.